Do you know what I love the most about springtime? I love the flowers. I love watching them bloom. I love all the colors. I love the way they smell. Do you know what I love even more than watching the flowers bloom? I love watching the little bees. See, the bees, after a long, hard winter, seem to get so excited when the first flowers start blooming. And they fly from flower to flower to flower, gathering pollen. And they take that pollen back to their hive and they make honey that they can eat. And then we also get to eat some of the honey, probably on a biscuit or some toast. Now, the flowers serve a purpose for the bees. The bees use the flowers to help them make honey. But the bees also have a purpose for the flowers. They help the flowers to make seeds that will make more flowers. As the bee flies from each flower to flower, it pollinates the flowers. So not only do the flowers have a purpose for the bees, but the bees have a purpose for the flowers. So everything that God has created has a purpose. And when you walk around today and you look outside and you look at all of the things that God created, remember, from the plants to the animals, that everything has a purpose. And God has a plan for each and every one of those things. So there are other things besides plants and animals that have a purpose. Can you guess who may have a purpose as well? Each one of us, you and me, and our mamas and our daddies and our brothers and our sisters and our aunties and our uncles and our grandmas and our grandpas. Everybody has a purpose. Do you know what that purpose is? That purpose is to serve God, to bring glory to God, and to show others God's love. That's our purpose. And there are different ways that each one of us can do those things for God, but God has decided how we're going to do it, even before we're born. See, when God was choosing what kind of hair you were going to have, what color eyes, that cute little nose you have, and even the little dimple, God was deciding what you looked like, but He was also giving you a plan and a purpose. See, God chose this time in history, this time on earth, to put you on earth at this time in history to accomplish His purpose, to do something amazing for God that will bring glory to Him and that will show others God's glory. I think that's pretty amazing, don't you? Today, we're going to be talking about Esther, okay? She was a young orphaned girl who became queen, and she saved her people. Now, before she was born, God definitely had a plan for Esther, and God's plans are perfect. Now, Esther's parents had died, and she had been adopted by her adult cousin named Mordecai, who raised her as his own daughter. And both Esther and Mordecai were Jews, and they were living in Persia. Remember, the Jews are God's people, and that's really important for you to remember this, okay? The king of Persia was known as King Ahasuerus or Xerxes, and he was a very powerful and very wealthy ruler. And he had decided one day that he would have a huge party so that he could show everybody how wealthy, how many amazing golden things he had, how many coins, how many treasures he had, how much wealth he had. He wanted to show them how many beautiful gardens he had and how wonderful his palace looked. And he even wanted to show off how beautiful his queen was. So he decided to have a big party. Now, this big party, it lasted 6 months. That's a long time. On the last day of the party, King Ahasuerus summoned for his queen, and his queen was named Vashti. Now, when you were summoned by a king back then, if you didn't obey, you could be punished. And you could either be punished by being put to death, or you could have things taken away from you. Okay? So he summoned for Queen Vashti, so he could show everybody how beautiful she was. Well, Queen Vashti said nope, that she wasn't coming. Whew. This angered the king. It angered him so much that he took the title of queen away from Vashti. He banished her from his sight, and he divorced her so that she could no longer have the power that came with her title of queen. And he decided to give the title of queen, her position of power, to another woman. Now, in order to find another queen, the king needed to bring in other young women from the province. So he asked servants to go around, and they were to round up all the young, beautiful women in the provinces of Persia, and they were to be brought to the capital city of Susa. Now, this is where we first meet Esther. Now, Esther, in the Bible, it tells us that Esther was beautiful of form and face. So she was quickly chosen as one of the young women to be taken to the capital to be presented to the king. Now, while they were there, before they could even be brought to the king, they were put under a servant called Haggai. And Haggai would make sure that they got the most beautiful baths, that they would smell fantastic, that their hair would look wonderful, that their face would be soft and it would smell nice, and that they'd get beautiful jewelry to put in their hair and beautiful clothes and the best food. So he was in charge of making them beautiful, to make them look like they were women that could be queen. Now, Haggai, when he met Esther, he really liked her. So not only was Esther a beautiful woman, but she had a beautiful heart. And Haggai quickly favored her. And so he started giving her the best things, from the best makeup and cosmetics to the best baths to the best food. Right? He even instructed her how to talk to the king in such a way that the king would fall in love with Esther. And Esther listened to Haggai's advice. So she listened to the things that he told her. Now, every day while Esther was in the palace receiving all these treatments, Mordecai, remember her cousin who had adopted her, he would sit by the king's gate so he could hear if Esther needed anything. And he would sit there and he would ask about her. Well, during one of these times, he told her to make sure that she did not tell anybody that she was a Jew, that she needed to keep that a secret. And Esther obeyed Mordecai, and she never told anyone that her origins were from the Jewish people, that she came from the Jewish people. Now, months passed, and it was time for Esther to be brought in front of the king. And when the king saw her and he heard what she had to say, he fell in love with her. And he put the crown on her head and made her queen of Persia. I think that's pretty neat. And he celebrated her and the person that she was. Okay. Now, maybe a few weeks later, okay, Mordecai still is coming to the king's gate, and he's still asking if Esther is okay. He comes and he hears some men talking about that they're going to hurt the king. Ooh. And that worries him, because he doesn't want the king to be hurt, because the king is taking care of Esther. And Esther is family, right? So Mordecai tells Esther to tell the king about this plot to kill him. So Esther goes to the king and she says, I've heard from Mordecai, a man named Mordecai, that there are people that are trying to kill you. So the king investigates it and he finds that it's true. And so he puts down Mordecai's name in a special book called the Book of Chronicles. And this was a book that the kings would keep to help them remember all the good things that happened during the reign and even the things that were bad. Okay. And he put Mordecai's name in the book to remind him of the good things that Mordecai had done for the king. Okay, so everything's been pretty good so far, right? Well, now here enters our bad guy. Okay. Our bad guy is named Haman. All right, and Haman was put in a position of high power in the kingdom of Persia, okay, by the king. Now, Haman was super prideful and he was really spiteful, which means he often sought revenge against people. Soon after Haman was promoted to this high position of authority, something happened between him and Mordecai. So Haman comes out and he's expecting everybody to bow to him because he has this high position of authority, of power. It's almost like he's a god and he wants people to treat him like he's a god and to bow to him and do all these things. Well, Mordecai doesn't bow to him because Mordecai is a Jew and the Jewish people, remember, they don't bow to anybody but God, the one true God. Okay? And Mordecai knew Haman wasn't a god, and he was not going to bow to him. Well, this angered Haman. It angered Haman so much that he not only wanted to kill Mordecai, but when he found out that Mordecai was a Jew, he said, it's not enough that I should kill Mordecai, but I want every Jew killed. I want them all killed. So he goes to the king and he says to the king that there's a people in the land of Persia that don't obey the king's laws, and they don't listen to the things that the king wants them to do, and that they're different. And so he asked the king and if he can kill all the Jews, if there can be a rule or a decree made that kills all the Jews, and that Haman will even give money to see that the Jews are killed. Okay. Well, the king doesn't remember Mordecai at the time. So he doesn't remember that this is the guy that helped him. Okay. So the king makes a rule that the Jews can be killed. Oh, man. So Mordecai hears it. Okay. And Mordecai is devastated. He's grief-stricken. He puts on sackcloth and ashes, and he walks through the city just crying loudly. And he makes it all the way to the king's gate. And Esther sees him. And now Esther doesn't know what has happened yet. Okay, and so she sees Mordecai. And so she sends out a servant to ask him what's wrong. And Mordecai informs the servant about the plot and the decree to kill all of the Jews, to kill all of the Jewish people in Persia. And he tells Esther that she has to do something about it, that she can't just sit by and watch it happen. Now, I'm going to read straight from my Bible the conversation between Esther and Mordecai. So I think it's important for you to hear. So Esther replied to Mordecai that if she did go towards the king without being summoned, that she could be killed, that the king had not summoned her for 30 days, and that there was a law that if the king didn't want you to come in front of him, that he could kill you. And she didn't want to be killed. And she told Mordecai, I can't go to him because he hasn't summoned me, and I will be killed, right? So Mordecai replied, do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. He's basically saying, if you don't stand up for your people, we'll all be destroyed. Maybe someone else will help save them, but you won't. But he also adds, maybe you have been made queen and been put in this position by God to help your people. So Esther replied to Mordecai, "Go, assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens will also fast in the same way, and thus I will go to the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish." So Esther decides that she will go to the king, but only, right, after fasting and praying. Okay, when you fast, a lot of the time you don't eat food and you don't drink anything during that time because you're praying. You're seeking God's help. And so she was asking all of the Jews to join with her in seeking God. And God provided. God gave her the things she needed. So on the 3rd day, Esther puts on her royal robes and she goes to the inner court of the king. Now his throne room was just inside the inner court, and she stood in the inner court just so that he could see her. Okay? Now, what she was doing, if he saw her and he was like, "What's she doing here?" she could be killed. Okay? But when he sees her, he's not angry. And he calls her over. And he extends his golden scepter, which meant that he was saying, "Come to me. You can come to me." And he extends his golden scepter, and she walks in and she touches the top of it. And he asks her what she wants, that he would give her half his kingdom just to tell him what she needs. And she asks him that if she pleases him, if he would come with Haman to a banquet or to a dinner that she would prepare for them that evening. Okay? So he said, of course. And so the king came, and he brought Haman. And they ate and they drank. And the king asked Esther again, "Esther, what is it that you need? I will give you whatever you want." And she says, "If I've found favor in the king's eyes, come again for another banquet and bring Haman, and I will tell you tomorrow what it is that I want." Okay? So she's patient. Okay? So Haman and the king leave. Well, that night, Haman is really prideful because he thinks he's got this big head because all the king and the queen, man, they were inviting him to a special dinner. And then he sees Mordecai and he gets mad and he says, "I just want Mordecai dead." And so he decides that it would be a good idea to build a platform to hang Mordecai on. And then that the next day he'd go to the king and say, "King, can I kill Mordecai? Because I don't like him," basically. So Haman goes to his house, and the king is back in his palace. Now the king has a restless night. He can't sleep. He has trouble sleeping. So he asks for his chronicles of the king to be brought to him and read to him. Well, as he's being read to, he is reminded that Mordecai had saved him from a plot to kill the king, that Mordecai had saved the king's life. And he also notices, man, I never thanked him for that. I didn't give him any special honors for helping me. So he decides that he was going to do something for Mordecai the next morning. So the king is in his throne room, and Haman, who got up extra early because he wants to ask for Mordecai's life. He wants to ask that Mordecai be killed. He goes early into the king to ask this of him. And when he walks in, before he can say anything, the king looks at him and says, "What would you do for someone that has pleased the king?" Well, Haman thinks, oh, he's talking about me. Well, king, you should put him on a horse and parade him around the city and talk about how wonderful he is and how the king is honoring him. The king goes, "That's a great idea, Haman. You know what? Go get all of those things and go get Mordecai, who sits out by the king's gate, and do that for him." I kind of find that funny, actually. So now Haman, who wanted to kill Mordecai, now has to, upon the king's order, take Mordecai around and say, "Woo, Mordecai's fabulous. Woo, Mordecai's fantastic." And all the while, Haman's, as he's saying that, he probably wasn't saying it happily. He was saying, probably grumpily like this, right? Okay. So Haman has to put Mordecai on this horse and take him around the city and talk about all the things Mordecai has done for the king. And this makes Haman he just hates it. And he's just whiny and upset and doesn't know what to do. And he goes to the dinner with the king and the queen, the king and Queen Esther. Well, while there, the king asks again, Queen Esther, what is it that you want? Ask anything and I will give it to you. Here's where it gets really interesting. The Queen Esther then tells him this. If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given to me as my petition, and my people as my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, to be annihilated. The king Ahasuerus asked Queen Esther, who is he, and where is he who would presume to do thus? Esther said, a foe and an enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman became terrified before the king and queen. Oh my goodness. The king arose in anger and turned into the palace garden. But Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that harm had been determined against him by the king. He knew the king was mad and was probably going to try to figure out how to kill him. Okay. Now, when the king returned to the palace garden, he saw that Haman was falling on the couch. Remember, Haman's falling on the couch to plead for his life in front of Esther, right? Was falling on the couch where Esther was. And then the king said, will he even assault the queen with me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. And then a servant tells the king that Haman had a platform built to hang Mordecai on. And the king says, take Haman and hang him. So Haman is killed. Now, on that day, King Xerxes, or King Ahasuerus, gave the house and the positions of Haman, okay, who was the enemy of the Jews, to Queen Esther and to Mordecai, okay? And Esther also asked the king to make a new decree that the Jews could defend themselves against anyone who was coming to kill them. Now the king, I bet you're wondering, why couldn't the king just say he wasn't going to do that rule anymore? Like, never mind that law about killing the Jews. It's done, right? We're not doing that. Well, once a king made a law back then, not even the king could stop that law from happening. So he made another decree that allowed the Jews to defend themselves against anyone who tried to hurt them. And he thought that that would help the Jews from being assaulted and from being hurt, that people wouldn't do it. So Queen Esther used her position as queen to save her people. God put her in that position of royalty so that she could go to the king and plead for the lives of her people and could save them. And to this day, the Jewish people celebrate the festival of Purim. And I think I'm saying that right. And that's basically celebrating what Esther did for their nation. Now, what can we learn from all this? Lots of things, actually. God takes care of his people and those who are faithful to him. See, God gave the courage that Esther needed to go before the king to save her people. She was courageous, right? But she wasn't courageous on her own. God gave her that. He still does that for us, his children, you and me. He gives us what we need to accomplish the work that God has for us. God always provides what we need when we need it. Esther also didn't try to rush God's plan. She took her time. And God used her patience to put all of the pieces into place for Esther to be successful in saving her people. So, no matter where you find yourself in life and who you become someday, remember that God has a plan for you. Now, you can't rush that plan. You have to seek God in prayer and wait for Him. Remember, His timing is perfect. Now, I'm going to leave you today with a scripture verse that I love. It's Jeremiah 29:11. And it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans not to hurt or to harm you, but to give you a hope and a future. And when you seek me, you will find me, when you seek me with all your heart." So my question to you guys today are you seeking God? Do you know what His plan is for you yet? If you don't, that's okay. And what amazing thing can you do for God today? Bye, y'all.